Here in Britain, we are about to vote in a watershed referendum in which we're being asked to permanently hand over all our political power to people who've been wrong about everything so that they can rule over us like kings. Sound like a deal? It's not being presented to us in exactly those terms, of course, because we're being conned. That's right, we're being swindled out of our sovereignty, our democracy, our security and our freedom by corrupt, self-serving career politicians who've never had a real job between them. Some of my American friends seem to think that the European Union is a kind of United States of Europe, and therefore a good thing. In fact, it's more akin to a new Soviet Union, and that's why Britain needs to get out. It doesn't have a constitution that guarantees fundamental liberties and government by consent, because its primary purpose is to eliminate the need for democratic consent, to empower politicians at the people's expense, and to make them our rulers, not our servants. Career politicians hate democracy because it holds them to account, at least up to a point. It means that every few years they have to justify themselves to plebs like you and me. It must infuriate them to think that their influential, well-paid jobs and their grand utopian political projects depend entirely on the shallow opinions of idiots like us. Of course they're going to try to remove us from the equation. We are the problem. The European Union was designed from the outset to take care of that problem by removing the people from the governing process entirely so that career politicians and their friends in big business could form a cosy cartel for their mutual convenience. This is why small business in the European Union is buried under an avalanche of unnecessary, petty, meddling regulation that prevents it from competing effectively with big business. It's also why what passes for democracy in the European Union is like a building on a movie set, all front and no substance. Because when you're imposing a grand political plan on people, you can't just abolish democracy, or there might be riots. So you give them a kind of decaf version, where people are elected to a puppet parliament, an assembly of powerless political eunuchs who are not allowed to initiate any legislation or remove the government. And most of them are quite happy to go along with the charade because they're so well paid for it, obscenely well paid. Like everyone in hock to the European Union, they're effectively being bribed with our money. And the people who run things know that they can get away with this sham because they know that most of us are not really paying attention. After all, it's only Europe. But of course it's not Europe at all, is it? It's the European Union, an authoritarian political entity that's been superimposed on Europe by unscrupulous career politicians who have stolen Europe's good name. If you look into many of the people who are urging us to stay in, you'll find that they're motivated by grubby self-interest, whether it's a fat EU pension they don't want to lose, or a fat EU job that they've got their eye on, or a lucrative grant that they've been receiving, or some other kind of European Union money, meaning our money that's going into their pocket. It's what we in Britain have come to know as the Kinnock factor. Look into it yourself and you'll see. Recently, the worst US president in history arrived in Britain to lecture us and to threaten us if we leave the EU. In doing so, he showed himself to be as arrogant and dishonest as he is weak and incompetent, and nobody was a bit surprised. What he didn't tell us is that he wants us to stay in because he wants to push through a sinister trade deal with the European Union that will give American corporations the right to sue the British government if it passes laws that affect their profits. But the European Union at its core is not about trade, it's about power. Trade is the blindfold they've used from the beginning, and even now in this referendum campaign they're focusing obsessively on transient economic issues. You'll be better off, you'll be worse off by this amount, by that amount. Who knows and who cares? But suddenly everybody is a clairvoyant to deflect our attention away from the real question, which is, who makes the laws that we have to live by, and how accountable are they directly to us? That's all that matters in this referendum, because everything else flows from that. If you can't remove the people who govern you, you live in a dictatorship, however many fancy labels and buttons and bows they dress it all up in. We cannot remove the people who run the European Union, no matter what they do, so they do what they want. They remove elected governments whose policies they don't approve of. They overturn and ignore democratic ballots whose results they don't like. They break their own rules whenever it suits them, with absolute impunity. And their fantasy currency has impoverished a whole generation in southern Europe, where youth unemployment is now 50%. Everything they've touched has been a disaster. They couldn't have done a worse job if they'd purposely set out to screw things up. And we want to give these people even more power? Are we insane? They meddled in Ukraine and got Putin's attention. Now they want a European army to face him down, with them in charge, elected by nobody except each other. Their reckless insistence on wide open borders has turned a manageable refugee crisis into a full-scale illegal invasion by hundreds of thousands of fighting-age third-world Muslim men who never stop telling us how much they hate our society, and we can't deport any of them no matter what they do, and they know that. And because none of them are screened in any way, Europe is now riddled with Islamic State terror cells, and everybody knows it's only a matter of time before the next massacre. The two countries that have opened their doors most widely, Sweden and Germany, are now plagued by an epidemic of migrant rape and sexual assault, while the police and the media do their best to cover it up. Soon all those men will have EU passports, and then they can come here and terrorise British women, and there's nothing that our miserable excuse for a government can do about it, because they've sold out our sovereignty to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats who don't have to care what we think about anything, because we've been left high and dry with no means of making them care. Why would free people ever sign up to an arrangement like that unless they were conned into it? And we were royally conned when we voted years ago for what we thought was a common market, what we thought was just a trading bloc. They swore up and down it would never develop into this kind of overarching, power-hungry political monster that now threatens our security and our freedom. We were conned back then, and we're being conned now. This is a long-con political coup that has taken decades to set up, and with this referendum, we are the mark who is just about to hand over their life savings. So maybe you're one of the people who hasn't quite decided yet how you're going to vote. But you think you might vote to stay in because it sounds more inclusive to be in than to be out, and you can't really be bothered to investigate any further because, well, it's only Europe. Plus, you are a bit worried about what might happen if we leave, not that you really understand what it means, because you can't be bothered to find out. Well, don't worry, you're not alone. There are millions of people like you who are not paying attention, and you are the ones they're relying on to push this criminal scam through. They're hoping that you'll vote to stay in because you won't know what you're signing away and how permanent it is until it's too late. So if you don't usually engage with politics, God knows I don't blame you. But this is much more important than politics. This referendum is far more important than any general election that any of us have ever voted in or ever will vote in, and it deserves our serious attention. This is a moment in history that we have a responsibility to embrace, not just for ourselves, but for future generations, because the entire future direction of this country and of our society is now in our hands, maybe for the very last time. It's going to go in one of two very different directions, so how we vote here really matters. Do we want to live in a strong, free, independent country governed by laws to which the people have consented, or do we want to be a province of a federal dictatorship where we do what we're told by unelected bureaucrats? When you sweep away all the speculation and verbiage, that is the choice. If we vote to remain, it'll be like willingly walking into a cage. A nice big cage with blue skies and little birds singing in the trees, but the cage is locked and you're not getting out. Welcome to the post-democratic era. It's no big secret. They've talked about it for years. We can't say that we weren't warned, but we will, won't we? When it finally dawns on us what we've done, we'll say, well, we didn't know. It's not our fault. We weren't paying attention. We couldn't be bothered to find out what was at stake until it was too late. Don't blame us. But future generations will blame us, and rightly so, for selling out their birthright, their right to democratic self-determination. It's so basic, it's so fundamental, we might as well be selling out their right to clean water and fresh air. Thanks to us, our children and grandchildren won't have a vote that counts. They won't have a voice. They won't be able to affect the society they live in or shape it in any way, and they'll be completely at the mercy of unelected, predatory career politicians. So please, this time, don't switch off the TV debates. Listen to the arguments. Pay attention to what's being said, because this time it does matter. And whatever you do, watch Brexit the Movie online. I'll include a link below. I defy anyone to watch that and still want to remain in the European Union, which is why you won't see it on the BBC, as it sends the wrong message. It tells the truth. And please don't take my word for any of this. Find out for yourself what's at stake, but do it before you vote in the referendum, and then you won't get a nasty surprise when it's shoved into your face afterwards. Peace.